We begin now with that political showdown over voting rights that's actually taking place across the country.
President Biden is doubling down on his promise to pass federal voting protections while condemning Republicans who've been pushing restrictive voting laws, calling it, quote, the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. As the president spoke, Texas Democrats were in Washington a day after fleeing the Lone Star State to prevent a vote on restrictions there. They've been meeting with lawmakers in the nation's capital, lobbying for federal voting rights legislation, while their Republican counterparts back in Austin are pushing to have the Democrats arrested. We have a team of correspondents covering this on the ground. Priscilla Thompson is in Austin. Mike Memoli is in Washington, D.C. Priscilla, let's start with you. Governor Greg Abbott had threatened to have the Democratic lawmakers arrested. So what is the latest on how the Republican legislators are responding?
Well, Joe, good morning. The Texas House voted yesterday along party lines, 76-4, to give the sergeant at arms permission to send for those missing lawmakers and even arrest them if that's what it takes to bring them back here to the Capitol. But of course, Texas law enforcement has no jurisdiction outside of state lines, and Democrats have signaled that they have no intention of coming back from Washington, D.C. until this special session is over. So it is very unlikely that we are going to see those arrests and see those Democrats brought back here. And I've been speaking with Republicans going into day two without a quorum in the House. They are continuing to slam their Democratic colleagues. I want to play part of my conversation with Representative Matt Shaheen.
I think it's a disgrace to the state of Texas. Election law is meant for the states to conduct, and they want to turn over Texas elections to the federal government? No way. Terrible idea. And it's a betrayal of Texas.
Democrats are so upset about this legislation. They have left the state. This has not happened in 18 years. Is there any place in these bills where Republicans will say, we're willing to give some concessions to move this along?
I don't think the Democrats are upset. They fly on private jets. They've got beer and alcohol. I think they're on vacation, having a great time on the taxpayers' dime.
Republicans here say that they will continue to hold meetings and work on legislation, though, of course, they cannot vote on any of that without a quorum. Joe?
So, Mike, this Texas-sized drama really teed up President Biden's speech on voting rights yesterday. What was his message about the federal legislation that's currently stalled in Congress?
Well, Joe, you certainly heard the president making a very forceful case, lighting into Republicans, lighting into his predecessor for what he called his selfishness, not his statesmanship, and trying to challenge the election results last fall. He said all these Republican-backed voter changes are a consequence of the big lie, which he said is just that, a big lie. But what advocates and what many in his own party wanted to hear was the president also making a forceful case in support of that legislation before Capitol Hill, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The president did that. Take a listen.
We'll be asking my Republican friends in Congress and states and cities and counties to stand up for God's sake and help prevent this concerted effort to undermine our election and the sacred right to vote. Have you no shame? Whether it's stopping foreign interference in our elections or the spread of disinformation from within, we have to work together.
Now, the president said he wanted to sign those two pieces of legislation, but what he didn't use was the term filibuster. Democrats, progressives did want to hear that, and the president was focused on this speech instead on a much broader audience, talking about this as a battle for the midterm elections as well.
So, Mike, he didn't mention the filibuster. We know that he's been receiving pressure on this point. The odds of passing either of those bills without eliminating the filibuster are slim to none. So what's the reaction on that there? What's the progressive wing of his party saying?
Yeah, interestingly, there was actually a progressive group that organized a demonstration outside of the president's event yesterday. They said they were disappointed. They wanted an LBJ-style real push to use the bully pulpit to promote the filibuster changes that they're calling for. We also heard from Reverend Al Sharpton. Remember, he was at the meeting with the president last week, and he said he talked to the president after the speech behind closed doors to press him on that issue. And he said the president told him that, listen, we're taking this one step at a time. The president thinks this is a very slow process that needs to work its way through as he works behind the scenes on this.
And Priscilla, back to you on the ground there in Texas. Texas Democrats met in D.C. with VP Harris and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer yesterday. Now, beyond trying to just kind of run out the clock on this Texas special session and stay out of the capital of that state, what's next for them?
Right, Savannah, they're going to continue to have those meetings. We expect them to be meeting with Senator Joe Manchin later this week. And Democrats say that, the last time they went there, only about 20 of them went. Now there are more than 50. They hope that this showing will have an impact, but it's very unlikely that they're going to see real action and movement on federal legislation on voting within the next several weeks. And of course, back here in Texas, the governor has signaled that he will continue to call special sessions until his agenda has been addressed. This is still a GOP-controlled legislature. And yesterday, we saw the Senate pass their version of this voting bill. So it is only a matter of time before the House version gets a vote. The Republicans in the House have already signaled that while this may be delayed, it has not been denied. Governor Abbott's agenda will ultimately be addressed and that their bill will get a vote. Savannah?
And Mike, while we have you, we want to talk about President Biden going to the Capitol today to meet with Senate Democrats and discuss one of his other major priorities, an infrastructure package. So tell us about that, the so-called human infrastructure part of his agenda, and also how that's separate bipartisan negotiations over the more traditional hard infrastructure, how that's going.
Yeah, this looks like a real breakthrough that occurred last night within the Democratic caucus. Democratic leaders coming out late last night to announce that there is agreement within the caucus broadly on a $3.5 trillion reconciliation measure. Remember, Senator Bernie Sanders, who's the chair of the Budget Committee, was talking about a package of close to $6 trillion. So there's some compromise within the caucus. And the president now going up to Capitol Hill, something we don't see often, but he's going to a very familiar place, the Senate cloakroom, to talk with Democrats behind closed doors. They want to see real progress before the end of the month. With limited time in session this summer, the president wants to make progress, and that's part of what he's going to try and do in person this afternoon, guys.
All right, lots to cover. Mike and Priscilla, thank you both so very much.
Coronavirus cases in the U.S. are rising once again after months of decline. It's being driven by the fast-spreading Delta variant, lagging vaccinations, and summer gatherings, people getting together. Right now, 48% of the country is fully vaccinated, which has been proven to mean protected against severe illness and hospitalization from the virus.
Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster. He's in Kansas City, Kansas. So, Shaq, we know right next door in Missouri, they've been dealing with a COVID surge in overwhelmed hospitals. What's happening, though, just across the state line there in Kansas?
Well, we spent a lot of time in Missouri on the other side of the border, as you mentioned, just last week. And you heard about what doctors were saying, the surge that they're seeing and the impact that is having. And we're now seeing that impact potentially happen on other states. Here in Kansas, the vaccination rate is actually a little bit lower than what we saw in Missouri. And when you look at it in a county level, you see it goes even lower. We have some graphics up here we can show you showing that only about 35% of the population is fully vaccinated here. That's just a hair lower than what you saw across the river or across the border in Missouri. That has doctors here alarmed. We spoke to one was on MSNBC just yesterday. Listen to what he told our Casey Hunt.
We have taken some transfers from those hard-hit areas of Missouri, like Springfield, Missouri as well. But overall, the numbers in our hospitals over the past week to 10 days have been increasing with those acute infections. And I should add, the majority, 75 to 80% of those people that are coming to the hospital are unvaccinated.
And when you look at those fully vaccinated numbers, while in Missouri, about 39.5% of the people are fully vaccinated, here in Kansas, that number is about 32%. Guys?
So, Shaq, we're seeing a lot of vaccine hesitancy. What are doctors saying about that? And what are they saying to patients who don't want the vaccine?
Essentially, get your vaccine as soon as possible. It is your only source of protection, especially with this Delta variant that continues to surge, especially in this area. And you look at cases, they're rising exponentially, especially in a place like Kansas. Listen to what the doctor said about that.
I have patients in my infectious disease clinic who have declined to get the vaccine. They still believe that the infection itself is not bad, or that it is nothing more than a flu-type illness, or that it's a government hoax. There is that continued concern that with vaccination, we are being subject to experiments, and we are like guinea pigs.
Now, despite that hesitation, officials are doing what they can to get those vaccines to as many people as they can. You're starting to see, and you're continuing to see, I should say, those incentives, and still starting to see some new incentives. For example, we'll be traveling to a vaccination site, one of the largest here in this county, where they're now introducing a spin the wheel kind of thing, where you go in, you spin the wheel, and you can get a prize. You can win a prize instantly for getting that vaccination. You get the sense officials are doing whatever they can to get as many vaccinations as they can as soon as possible.
Unclear if those incentives work, but I guess they're going to try whatever they can. Shaq, I know the situation has gotten so bad in some areas. Chicago is now advising that unvaccinated travelers from Missouri and also from Arkansas get a COVID test before coming to the city. Tell us more about what Chicago is saying.
Yeah, this is a travel order that has been in place for several months now, since it dates back to last year. And it was at the peak of the pandemic. Chicago was limiting who can come into the city, or at least saying if you come from these certain states, you need to quarantine or get a negative COVID test. Well, for the past couple of weeks and months, there have been no states on that list. Anyone could travel to Chicago without any quarantine, but that travel order still remained in effect. Well, now with the rising cases in Missouri and the rising cases that you're seeing in this area, you're seeing that travel order come back. Missouri now on the list, requiring that quarantine or that mandatory test before you arrive back in the city.
Curious to see if other places follow suit, restrict travel or put in restrictions for states that are hotspots. All right, Shaq, thanks so much.
Let's stay on COVID with our stellar team and bring in Isa Gutierrez. Isa, good morning. So let's talk about some of the latest coronavirus headlines and what everybody needs to know here. First, starting with the Delta variant and its impact on younger people. And this headline this morning in Tennessee, the state's top vaccination official who was working to get teens vaccinated was fired over that. What happened there? What do we know?
Hey, good morning, Savannah. Yeah, so tensions had really been rising over the last few weeks between Dr. Fiscus and Republican state lawmakers over her efforts to try and get teens in Tennessee, young people in Tennessee, vaccinated. Most recently, she published a memo on the state's mature minor doctrine. That's a Supreme Court case ruling from 1987 that states that 14 to 18-year-old Tennesseans may be treated without parental consent unless the physician believes that the minor isn't sufficiently mature to make their own healthcare decisions. Dr. Fiscus said that many lawmakers interpreted this memo as really an attempt to undermine parental consent for vaccinations. Take a listen.
What really concerns me is that in order to appease the legislators that were upset about this memo, our leadership of the Department of Health has instructed the Department of Health to no longer do outreach around immunizations for children of any kind. There is a significant contingent of people here and many of our lawmakers, unfortunately, who choose to buy into anti-vaccine rhetoric and conspiracy theory instead of listening to actual science and listening to CDC recommendations.
In a statement, Dr. Fiscus also said that she feels that she was fired for essentially doing her job, which was to provide evidence-based education as well as vaccine access so that Tennesseans could protect themselves against COVID-19. A spokesperson for the health department said that they would not be commenting on her termination. Savannah?
And news on that front will not be slowing down as we head closer and closer to back to school time with kids and teens getting vaccinated. Isa, now let's talk about this other thing that everybody's kind of wondering about. It's been a little confusing, booster shots. So federal health officials say we don't need one. We're hearing, though, that Pfizer wants to get one approved. And then we're also seeing that Israel is already moving forward with a third dose as that country experiences a surge, even though they have 80% of adults vaccinated. We heard from Dr. Anthony Fauci about all of this. What's he saying about the possibility of a booster? Could people potentially be getting that third dose?
Yeah, so right now, Dr. Fauci is saying that booster for individuals who are already vaccinated is not necessary currently. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't be recommended in the future, but right now for vaccinated individuals, boosters are not needed. And he said that that's especially while many Americans have not been vaccinated at all yet, that's really the focus of the efforts right now to get the percentage of Americans who are vaccinated against COVID-19 higher up. He also really is emphasizing the fact that this conversation about whether or not boosters are necessary at the moment is completely separate from the effectiveness of these COVID-19 vaccines. Savannah?
All right. So basically still a lot of questions there. But Issa, thank you so much for catching us up. Good to see you. Now, consumer prices in June rose at their fastest pace in 13 years. Everything from groceries to gas to eating out at a restaurant saw a bump. The biggest driver of inflation last month was used cars and trucks, surging by more than 45%. NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Rule explains.
Savannah and Joe, we have all seen it. Prices are up almost across the board. But it's important to remember, these price increases are directly tied to the pandemic. And while it's great to see the economy recover with such gusto, we've got some serious issues to work out. In the grocery store, at the gas pump, on the car lot, prices keep rising. From May to June, inflation jumping nearly 1%. And compared to a year ago, up 5.5%, the largest increase in almost 13 years. A big reason, the sticker price for used cars and trucks, jumping more than 45%. Ongoing supply shortages, leaving dealerships without enough used cars to sell.
Pretty up there. New cars as well. You gotta have a car, you gotta have a car.
We have had the guts to go out and pay the escalated prices to hope that we could sell it to the consumer. We have them in inventory and the consumers are buying them.
Food prices also increasing, like milk up nearly 6%, along with fruits and vegetables up 3%. Meanwhile, restaurants are charging more to cover higher wages. And at the gas pump, drivers are paying 45% more. Experts describe it as a perfect storm. Businesses reopening across the country, supply chain problems creating shortages, and consumer demand soaring.
It's coming off of last year, after which actually prices for a lot of goods really fell. Airline prices fell, hotel prices fell. Now they're coming back with a lot of demand.
The Biden administration telling Americans this is short term, brought on by the pandemic and the economic recovery. What can we do to protect ourselves?
Well, you can shop around. That's one thing you can do. You can make choices to go with substitutes or things that aren't up quite as much.
Now, the White House and many independent economists believe that these price increases will start to slow as we get back to normal and these reopening kinks work themselves out. But in the meantime, it's expensive out there. And even though wages are going up, prices are going up even faster.
More severe weather is expected in the U.S. this week. Scientists are now pointing to climate change as a major factor in weather events like the record-breaking heat waves we've been seeing out west. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin has more.
In the Northeast, freak flooding. In a matter of hours, parts of Pennsylvania doused with up to 11 inches of rain. Residents forced to flee their homes. Meanwhile, out west, historic heat, with the region's largest fire still only 0% contained. After 4 days of explosive growth, smoke from that fire in Oregon now clouding the skies over Utah. Extreme conditions leading to extreme concern, as scientists say climate change shows no signs of slowing its deadly rampage.
Scientists have predicted this for the last 70 years, but it's actually happening more quickly and it's more intense than we realized.
So far this year, there have been $8 billion weather disasters, from the deadly Texas freeze in February to the heat wave that hit the Pacific Northwest, killing more than 200 and devastating the coastline, with hundreds of millions of mussels literally cooked alive. An event so extreme, scientists now say it would have been virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. Severe heat is drying out the West, with reservoirs reaching new lows. The parched conditions now fueling infernos across the region, making the fires bigger and more destructive. 2020 was a record fire season for California, but with more than twice as much scorched earth compared to the same time last year, a record already on track to be broken. Across the West, extreme heat continues to threaten 10 million Americans, and officials are asking Californians to cut down their water use by 15%.
Let's get a check on the latest weather events across the country coming up now this morning.
Yeah, hi, Bill. Good to see you. That sounds like a lot of bad news. What do you got for us?
Yeah, it's been an unbelievable start to the summer just with what's happening in the West. And, so far temperatures, we've been talking so much about the West, but it's actually been slightly below in a few spots in the middle of the country in the Southeast. But it's just in the West where it's just been crazy. And because it's been so hotter than normal, look at how many record highs we've broken since the beginning of summer, almost 3,000. Where we've only had 430 record lows. So that's like almost 7 times more. And these were some of the highlights. 213 all-time record highs were broken. Daily highs up to 40 degrees above average. And of course, Canada had that record 121. And our scientists have gotten together. We call it attribution studies. And they say that this climate change has made these events this summer 150 times more likely than it would have been in the past. So as far as today's weather goes, watch out. Severe storms possible. Des Moines, the Minneapolis, Chicago, Milwaukee, especially that area in the orangish color there. Maybe even a few tornadoes. Isolated severe storms in the Northeast. But it's not going to pour too bad. And for once, guys, this map is a typical summertime map. This is how it's supposed to look. Nothing too extreme. Today's probably the quietest weather day we had since before Elsa.
Oh, my goodness. That's a relief based especially on what we just heard from Aaron.
Yes.
Bill, thank you so much.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.